Welcome to the first episode of REFACTR Rerun. We thought it'd be a really cool idea to talk about some of the topics and speakers that we've had at previous events. And Diana is a fan favorite. She spoke at REFACTR 2019. And there she spoke on DevOps 101, automation without the frustration. And so we're going to have a kind of interview Q&A with her a little bit later, but we thought it'd be a really good idea to kind of refresh everyone's memory on some of the things that she brought up in her talk. So she starts to talk off talking about the effect of DevOps and how the adoption of a DevOps culture, its tools and practices has the really nice effect of increasing collaboration between development and operations teams. And so on the ops side, as we've made more advances in automation, we don't really have to have our data centers be right there with our data centers anymore due to these advancements in automation. So bringing that to what we can do with development practices and what we can do to automate development workflow is something that she talks about a lot in this talk. So what is automation? Well, in Diana's terms, automation is a term that refers to the processes and tools an organization uses to reduce the manual efforts associated with provisioning and managing infrastructure. And so to think of infrastructure, especially infrastructure as a code, you can think of that as the management of infrastructure, networks, virtual machines, load balancers, and connection topology in a descriptive model using the same versioning as DevOps teams use for source code. Infrastructure as a code evolved to solve the problems of environment drift in the release pipeline. And so I think that gives you a good foundation, but one of the things that Diana mentioned in her talk is that as she was learning more and more about automation, she came up with a few frustrations in that process. So one was the learning curve and the complexity of the tools. Then the documentation and the communities sometimes were very different and not consistent. And sometimes there were gaps in that documentation, which contributed back to that learning curve. Then you might be using an open source tool versus a commercial tool. And maybe the thing that you were really planning to use is something from a commercial tool that you need to pay for. You need to pay for a suite of tools. Then there's the adaptability, provider compatibility, and different migration issues. If you started a project, say, using Chef, what happens if you later want to migrate that project and use something like Puppet? And so Diane is going to talk about a few ways that she eliminated some of those frustrations. But I think the first thing that she mentioned is you want to know why you're automating. And so she came up with a few ways to know if something needs to be automated. And if you're trying to get rid of like kind of error-prone errors, things that happen with some kind of predictability, errors that happen with some kind of predictability, you want to make sure you're making the cloud or computer do the work for you. You're not working towards the cloud. And if it actually makes your life easier, that's a good indication that this is something that can be automated. It allows you to reuse code. That's always a good thing. And then you want to make sure that you're scripting any repetitive tasks. And so next kind of frustration that she was overcoming was understanding the difference between a configuration orchestration like Terraform or AWS CloudFormation versus configuration management, something like Chef or Puppet. And there's some overlap between these tools. Some tools do a little bit of orchestration, even though they are in the management side, and some do a little bit of management, even though they're on the orchestration side. So that can kind of add to the confusion that's there. But she really thinks that while there's so many tools that you could use, so many amazing tools, you should really use what works well for you and your unique tech challenges. She then detailed how she was able to solve the issues her team was running into using Terraform. And so she was able to improve CloudWatch alarms with more freedom, reduce deployment time, use prevent destroy for critical resources, use Lambda functions to check health of resources not attached to an ELB, create Slack hooks to notify changes in the Terraform channel. And she developed wrapper scripts to allow operations with a single command, including things like committing code, planning and locking plans, refreshing the remote state, notifying of upcoming changes with specific tags, and display those plans on Slack for review. And she was successful. And so after her automation implementation, she didn't really have to worry about those human errors that could be predicted or expected. And this gave her even more time to focus on improving the infrastructure and thinking of new ways to automate more processes. So that's kind of a recap of Diana's talk. I'll now turn it over to Beth as she's going to ask Diana a few questions.
Thanks so much, Erica. That was a great overview of Diana's great talk. So one of my favorite things about Diana is that she makes everything so simple. Things that are really complicated and there's a lot of buzzwords, she just kind of cuts through and gets to the heart of things. So that's one of my favorite things about any talk Diana gives. But before we get into some of the questions that people have sent in, I would love for you to give us an update of what you're doing now, because things have changed a little bit since your talk.
Yes, definitely. Wow, Erica, thank you. You made my talk sound amazing. And yeah, I am currently a Python developer advocate at Nexmo. And, you know, it's a completely different challenge. I'm doing more of, you know, a combination of developer relations and also coding, because I'm maintaining 2 Python SDKs for 2 cloud communication APIs. One is for communications and the other one is for videos. But again, this is something that I still need to apply, and it's something that can be applied to different areas, not necessarily to infrastructure all the time. I think DevOps is something that encompasses the whole sphere, you know, of the tech ecosystem. And it's like this infinite loop. You can apply this everywhere you go.
Well, that's funny, because that's a perfect lead into our first question, which is one of the things that you talk about quite a bit is the DevOps culture, and that DevOps really is a culture. It's not a job. And do you have any suggestions or guidance that you can offer about how do you bring the DevOps culture into an organization?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say the first thing and the most important is to promote communication and collaboration. The very foundation of the DevOps culture is communication, and that to foster collaboration between different sectors of the same ecosystem. So in the past, we had issues where, I don't know, developers versus operations, developers versus security, QA versus security, QA versus developers, and then there was always this kind of miscommunication or fight just because each sector didn't understand their needs or the goals of the other sectors. We were so siloed in our own skills and capacities that now the idea of having that perpetual involvement from our own spheres and being aware of whatever other groups are involved in this chain and how our actions impact them in this chain is crucial. So yeah, promote collaboration and communication equals understanding. If we have understanding, we can align the way we pursue our goals, and it doesn't mean that we have to be the same to be one. We can be walking through different ways, through different paths, and have a common goal, and each of us from our own sectors achieve it to our capacities, to our extents, to our abilities, and to what we are sort of designed to do, or what we are required to do from each sector. I would say also there has to be a lot of room for failure, because this is a process that is ongoing, and it will take our entire life to actually get to a point where, you know, we have that cadence. It's ongoing. Getting leadership on board is important, because what happens, and I apologize if I'm extending myself with this answer, is that yeah, we can have our DevOps processes lined up very well between developer and operations and the technical side of things. But what happens with a project manager who is not so technical, who is in charge of delivering metrics and is focused on the ROI side of things, as someone who is focused on numbers, who is getting pressured from C-levels and from boards who don't understand how processes work, how do we make that connection between the business side and the development side and every other side involved in this process is crucial. So leadership has to be educated as well. Automation obviously is key to DevOps culture. So as much as we can reduce those error-prone errors and the human side of errors, and we can use those automation tools to strengthen our own capacities, because it's not, automation is not here to replace human work, it's here to enhance it, you know. And then I would say, for last, encourage exploration. Not all tools are suitable for all companies or organizations, you know. We all have different ways to see the world, so some tools work better than others, and definitely if we have that open mind to try things that we haven't tried before, that will set us for success.
So it sounds like those are really good suggestions, but it sounds like it's not enough to have the engineering organization bought into DevOps. It's really much broader than that.
Definitely, 100%.
That's a good point, because I think sometimes organizations think of it as just an engineering problem, and it's much broader than that. So you did mention a bunch of tools in your talk, and Erica did a great job of outlining some of them. I think that if you got paid every time you said CloudFormation, you would, have another revenue stream. I know that. Are there any updated tools that have come out, or any updates that have made some tools more compelling than they were?
Well, yeah. So Terraform, for example, is a tool I mentioned as well. It wasn't novelty back then, but it was getting very interesting. There is Ansible. It's by Red Hat. It's one of my favorite tools as well, because it allows you to do a little bit of orchestration as well, a little bit of automation. You can even automate security responses with an extra tool called Tower. So you can sort of predict what common threats you'll be getting and automate the responses to sort of have some mitigation before things happen. And then if it did happen, you still have enough time to respond. So that's something I like from Ansible. There is another tool in the likes of Terraform and Ansible called Pulu, and it's basically the same, like on the same path of automating infrastructure and certain security responses, but you can use your preferred programming language other than YAMLs. So you can use JavaScript if you're a JavaScript person, and I think this opens a big door to programmers who are not so familiar with the infrastructure realm to explore this in a language they know. I think it also works with Python and .NET and Java. I can't remember exactly. And then, well, obviously the good old CloudFormation from AWS.
So what is that tool that you mentioned again? What's it called? How do you spell it?
Pulumi. It's Pulumi. Pulumi.
Oh, cool. I've never heard of that before. So that's awesome.
It's pretty new, so it's quite cool. And again, another key component of the DevOps culture is not going after buzzwords or the edge, but to try to be up to date as much as possible and kind of take from fashion what suits you best.
I could see where that could be an ongoing kind of friction of, well, we figured out our pipeline and it's working, so why do we have to change it? With, what benefits do you get by being updated and kind of pushing the envelope a little bit, maybe not the bleeding edge.
Yeah, definitely not the bleeding edge.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I really, what advice do you have for organizations that are building out an on-call rotation to avoid having everything dumped on the ops team when something does happen? What do people need to know, and what needs to be included in documentation and training?
This is interesting. So educating, and it was my way to defy the old ways where information was concentrated on a very specific team, which always happens with the ops team. Having a mitigation culture, a predictive and preventive maintenance culture for on-call rotations is advised. I like a tool called VictorOps. Is not as I guess as popular as Ops Genie, but I like VictorOps. It's affordable for small businesses, and it includes other sectors, not only operations. But you can actually schedule on-call rotations for other tasks, not only emergencies. It's an interesting question. The idea of having the DevOps culture in general is to stop shipping the fires that we have to put out later, right? So if we're doing it right, and then exploring with things like chaos engineering could help mitigate a little bit of those risks, or a little bit of dumping everything on the ops team every time something happens, because ideally we keep our maintenance preventive so we don't have to put out fires, but those things still happen, right? What do people need to know? People need to know that we can't ship things that are not production worthy. We have to stop that chain. We have to stop that culture. The industry fosters firefighters, ninjas, rock stars, and superheroes, and I think that's just wrong. We should be encouraging people who push clean code, who have good practices, who promote best practices, and sometimes that means not releasing until things are a little bit more decent. We can't prevent 100% that things are going to go wrong, because we're humans. We're coding, right? And very much our own particular circumstances do add, make a difference to the work we're pushing. But if we can reduce the risk of those things happening by having healthier practices on the way we deliver code, then we don't need to worry about dumping everything on the operations team or having to put out fires. We're encouraging a healthier culture, and then we don't have to glorify a person that is not necessarily engaged, throughout the process, but comes one day and saves the day for, working 12 to 18 hours in a very unhealthy way to patch, overpatch. That has to stop. So yeah, that would be my suggestion.
So, and there's always that tension between getting things out quickly and getting things out well. And that's just a constant tension. But do you think that there's a value in having a easy to apply rollback process?
Oh, yeah, well, definitely. I obviously skipped a lot when I answer the question, but things like proper documentation of whatever we're working on, an easier rollback system that is also well documented, good mitigation practices that are well documented. I think here information is the key. We are used to dumping all the responsibility of keeping the truth or all the information or having all the answers to all questions to CTOs, to project managers, product owners, when we should be knowledgeable enough to respond in our own areas as well, and to add to documentation. So definitely, yeah.
That makes sense. Are there any gotchas when using CloudFormation?
I I mentioned CloudFormation a lot because my personal experience was sort of terrible, because I find it, even though it's a very complete tool and it was definitely revolutionary when it came out, with time it evolved into something so cryptic with such a steep learning curve that it actually cost me pain personally. And that's why I was looking for tools to simplify the processes, because, for example, there's no easy rollback process with CloudFormation. There's no way to debug or see errors as they're happening if you're using CloudFormation. So you only have to wait until everything is deployed and failed, and then you have to roll back, and then the rolling back process is so complicated. And yes, CloudFormation does have strengths, but for the use case I was working on for what I needed immediate responses. It wasn't working. So yeah, I would say CloudFormation has a steep learning curve. It can be cryptic. You have to be very well versed in AWS infrastructure. So if you're onboarding a new person in your team, it will take them time to get familiar with the tools and also the way to describe infrastructure. And we all know that working with JSONs is not the easiest thing to do. Imagine layered JSONs. So it's like
Easy to miss.
nested.
Yeah, easy to miss something in there, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. For someone starting down the automation path, where do you start? Like if you are not working in an organization that already has a lot of automation and so forth, and you're trying to bring that to maybe a small team or small organization, how do you baby step into it?
The best path for success in there is your team has to be, I mean, granted, you need to code, right? You need a team that is knowledgeable in any kind of programming language. Even for infrastructure is extremely important. Scripting is definitely a must. I would say it is necessary to have good knowledge with Bash, like to be able to make your own shell scripts. That's too much freedom, but it can save your soul in moments of crisis. I would recommend Python because it's simple for scripting. It's simpler for scripting. It's simpler to automate the automation. So a programming language, scripting, and then an automation tool. I think depending on what you want to achieve, Terraform and Ansible are the best choices. You can use them together or you can use them separately. They will achieve the same goals. Terraform only focuses on describing infrastructure. Ansible goes a little bit further. You can bootstrap machines and images as you wish, and it works with other tools to make that happen as well, with images and security and networking in a different way, probably more flexible than Terraform. But then to be able to use Ansible properly, you need to have a good level of Python, I would say.
And Python seems to be the dominant language for a lot of a lot of this. So I know a lot of people who love Python, so that's good. And I guess it's kind of a short hop if you've already been doing some scripting. There's a lot of kind of similarity, so not too bad. One of the questions that we had was whether, if you were giving your talk today, there was anything that you would change or update, any information that's changed, or anything that your opinions have developed in a different way.
I would include Ansible. I would include Pulumi as an option. I think a good way to also foster the DevOps culture is to be the framework and tool agnostic person. Yeah, for as much as I love Python, for example, if my use case needed me to use Ruby, I need to be open-minded enough to see that all frameworks, all tools, and all programming languages have strengths, and it's not a competition. So I would say definitely that I'm not trying to convert anyone into the Terraform or Ansible or Pulumi religion, but more to broaden your horizons and give you information so you can make a better and informed guess, because we're always guessing, right? Or a decision. But yeah, and I would have added the importance of TDD to really enforce testing and tests. I've learned a lot. I had to force myself to do this at my new job, and it has made wonders. The quality of my code and the quality of my code reviews has increased significantly, and I feel more knowledgeable now that I'm doing something more than writing happy paths.
So how long did that transition take you to get used to doing TDD?
It's still going. But the hardest part, I think it took me like a couple of months to really sink in and find a tool that I felt comfortable with, to overcome the fears and I've been doing this for 20 years and I can't deal with this today. What kind of professional am I? And to be frank, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this for, you'll always have those kinds of days.
Everybody I've ever talked to who started working someplace that does TDD has always said it was incredibly painful, but that at some point they just it's like a switch that flipped and suddenly they got it, and then they were just like rolling really well.
It truly changes your life for the best. And I actually have to thank my manager, Laura Tchaikovsky at Vonage, who's been the most supportive person, who has encouraged me to push through. At first I felt I was coasting, through all those challenges, but once you get it, it works on your favor, definitely.
That's what I've heard. I've also heard that the transition is painful, and a lot of people don't make it through to the other side. So good for you. That's awesome. So is that how like every team operates?
Well, yeah. I just passed my probation at Vonage yesterday.
Yay! Congratulations.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like that highlights of the day. So we are making the effort of being, that kind of team everywhere. At least I can speak for the PDX platform and developer experience at Vonage. We are encouraging not only best practices and TDD, but also the culture of people first and the culture of true collaboration. So it has made wonders as well. Our results, the way we communicate, things like I know it might seem silly, but this is part of the DevOps culture as well. If you're in a company and you have a tool like Slack for communication and you're reaching out privately to people, then probably other people who could benefit from this experience are missing out. So we decided we have, for example, our server SDK channel, which is a public channel where we funnel all the questions that go to server SDKs, which is where I work, right? And we encourage those discussions because people can find answers in there. We're trying not to do private coding or mentoring as much as we can to things that can apply to everyone else and to other teams who come and read from us in there. And that has worked very well, fostering that collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really hard for people to ask questions because they feel dumb. And so if you can culturally set the stage so that there's an expectation that you ask a question and nobody's going to think less of you for asking a question, it makes people more confident in having those questions in a more public area.
Oh, and the worst question is the one you never ask.
So I'm sure that's super valuable also, just because more people can find answers, whether it's right then or things they didn't know. So that's pretty cool. So it seems like there's also a correlation or a relationship between doing a good job of DevOps and also building in some automated testing so that you are adding a level of confidence to your deployment by using tests as a tool to make sure that you haven't accidentally broken something. Is that an area that you've done anything in?
Yes, it's our foolproof protection. Actually, Erica mentioned it and it happened to me. So I was the person who was in charge of doing all this automation, along with my team and others who contributed in this process. The first person to take production down for 14 minutes was me, because I just applied a plan that wasn't supposed to happen, and just simple things like that. So, pre-commit tests to make sure that, the plans actually align with what has to be done. Having a script that will check that things are committed and pushed and tagged appropriately on GitHub. So if anything happens, we know what to roll back from, so we have enough information. General testing, in more depth than what I would know. Those are the ways to safeguard us from the pains of having to put out fires. And 99% of the time, fires happen because we ship them.
Yep, that makes sense. And I guess whatever you can do, making all the checks that make sense and don't slow things down too much, gives you just that added security and safety. So better to take an extra minute than have to go fix it. So I don't have any more questions that were sent in to us. So I was going to just see if there are any questions in our chat. We've got people talking about TDD. It's a whole new paradigm. So that's exciting. I could see where that would be a big organizational shift. So it's not something you can just as an independent developer decide to do.
It is definitely it's the same thing with agile technologies and things like Scrum. I have a friend actually who made a joke. It made me laugh, but he said he envisioned Scrum as communism. No one ever gets to it effectively, And then I laughed for 30 minutes and I'm like, well, I don't get it. But then I thought, well, how do we adapt to the tools that are out there? I don't think there's a formula and a source of truth for things that we have to apply 100% to what the rule says. I would say that good leaders know how to adapt the best of what's out there to their teams. And I had to face that myself, in my previous job being a chief DevOps architect, having to deal with things like informing the team about changes and assuring that these new tools were worth the hassle, that we had to update our knowledge, that we had to grow personally as developers to achieve this goal, and then as a team. And like, how do you encourage people to make the investment, of learning new practices? Because I know it's hard. I'm sure if I would have to say so. I've been, like I said, I've been in this industry for 20 years, and TDD was a pain for me, and it still is. But at least I know I can communicate clearly what my concerns are, and that my opinions are valid. And look, we are all pieces in this big puzzle. There are no two pieces alike. And that's why we need this diversity, not only diversity in terms of ethnicities or genders or preferences or whatever, but also the diversity of knowledges, of opinions, of, someone who's been developing for a couple of years may have fresher ideas or a different insight, and everything that is put on the table is valid, so we feed off those different experiences to make things happen. And at the end of the day, the end result is what matters, right?
Yes, absolutely. So when you are going and evaluating something new, whether it's a new tool or it's a new process or something like that, do you already have in your mind kind of a checklist of what you're looking for? Or are you going in and kind of investigating, like, let me see what you can do and let me see if it's a good fit? How do you approach something like that?
Well, I am very basic, and probably this would give room for people to suggest maybe better ways to approach something like this. Whenever I look for a new tool, there are two key selling points for everything new I need to learn or adapt or bring up to the table. First, the documentation. Any tool or any product that has good documentation is already a winner. Then community. Because if anything happens that is not in the documentation, the community is going to be your source of knowledge. So you obviously want to connect with an inclusive and friendly community, or at least a community that participates and is always, I like communities that lengthen their stride, It's like the Flask community, for example, in Python. It's a micro framework, but it's a very small community, but they're always creating things. And whatever is not in the documentation, or if you have any issues, there's always someone to go to, right? And that would be the two things I use to make that decision. Pulu, for example, has amazing documentation, and they're saying that they're improving it, and that's even better, But because they have the initiative and they have a good documentation, and they're making a tool approachable by giving people the chance to use whatever programming language they know, they're giving room for others to create not only good and new content, but also answers to those things that may arise in the future. So yeah, I'm basic like that.
No, those are really good things to look for, because without that, then there's kind of no point. You could have a really awesome tool, but if I don't have any documentation, how am I going to use it? I mean, then it just becomes trial and error, right? And that doesn't feel really good. So,
and that's certainly a practice that AWS has. And I don't mean to, I'm not dissing them, because I'm an active user, but it happens that sometimes they roll out a feature and the general public has grown cautious of using their latest feature because they take about 6 months to actually develop a really good documentation. Like the solid content comes after 6 months. So that's why, I exercise caution whenever something new is rolled out.
I feel that way whenever my phone wants to update too. So I don't want to be updating on that first day. I don't care what they say. But yeah, that kind of seems like it holds true. Well, this has been really great, Diana, and you're just so amazing. And thank you for sharing with us like all your advice and your great, wonderful attitude and warmth. And we really, really appreciate it. I'm going to hand it back over to Erica to talk for a minute about our other upcoming events.
Thank you again, Diana. That was super insightful. And I learned so much about DevOps and how you integrate it into your culture. So thank you so much. Thank you for the great questions from our audience. And thank you for being an awesome moderator, Beth. So we do have a few more events, a few more online events. Our next event is our 90s Netflix party. And for this month, it's going to be Bad Boys. And so we're all going to get together and view that Sunday, June 14th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And then we're going to continue this series of talking about some of the topics that came out of REFACTR.TECH, our conference that focuses on diversity, inclusion, and tech from 2019. And so the next speaker will be Henri, and he will be speaking on Planet of the APIs. That will be June 24th at 7 p.m. online. So make sure that you sign up for that event so that you don't miss that. And then if you ever want to stay in contact with us, these are all of our social media profiles and ways that you can keep in contact to get any updates and see the schedule for REFACTR.TECH reruns, join our newsletter, and register for our next event. And don't forget to check the link in our Slack, in the Zoom Slack, right? Comment area right here. So thank you again for joining us for the first REFACTR Rerun episode. And everybody have a great night.
Thanks so much.